When a dismissive avoidant and you both stop contacting each other, it begins with silence. Not the dramatic kind, but the kind that lingers quietly, like the echo of something unfinished. Two souls, both wounded in their own way, finally stop reaching out. The calls fade, the texts disappear. The rhythm that once kept the connection alive suddenly stops. For a while it feels like the end, like the last page has been turned. But it isn't the end. It's the beginning of something far more honest. Because when two people stop chasing, what's left isn't peace, it's truth. When a dismissive avoidant stops contacting you, it's rarely out of hatred or indifference. It's about control. Control over their emotions, over their fear of being hurt, over the vulnerability they've spent a lifetime avoiding. They believe that by withdrawing, they can protect themselves from rejection, from feeling too much, from reawakening the wounds they've buried. But when you stop contacting them too, something subtle begins to happen. The silence, which they once used as a shield, starts to echo. At first, they feel relief. Finally, no more emotional pressure, no more expectations. But as the days stretch on, that relief transforms into curiosity. They begin to wonder, why aren't you chasing me anymore? For someone with a dismissive avoidant attachment style, connection is a battlefield. They crave intimacy, yet fear it. They want love, but associate it with being controlled or consumed. When you used to reach out, when you texted, checked in, tried to fix things, it gave them comfort. It reminded them they were still desired. But when you stop reaching out, the entire dynamic shifts. Suddenly, the power they thought they had begins to fade. They're no longer the one being pursued. They become the one wondering what happened. And that confusion stirs something deep inside, something they've been running from their entire life. Meanwhile, you're going through your own emotional storm. The urge to reach out still lingers. You catch yourself glancing at your phone, hoping they'll finally say something. Anything. The silence feels heavy, almost punishing. But slowly, after the ache fades, a strange calm begins to settle in. You start realizing how much emotional energy you've spent trying to hold together something that wasn't equally shared. You begin to see the pattern, how often you reached out not from love, but from fear. Fear of losing them, fear of being forgotten, fear of silence itself. And then that silence, the very thing that once hurt, starts feeling like freedom. It's not just the absence of their voice, it's the return of your own. You start remembering what peace feels like. You start remembering yourself. But something else happens beneath the surface. Something energetic. The avoidant senses this shift, even without contact. They can feel that your energy is pulling away, that the emotional cord they once depended on for validation is growing weaker, and this triggers the one thing they've tried to avoid at all costs: fear, the fear of being forgotten. Avoidants love to believe they don't need anyone, that they can live detached, untouched by emotional dependency. But when someone who once cared deeply suddenly goes quiet, that belief begins to crumble. Their silence, once their power, becomes their mirror. They start to see the loneliness they've tried so hard to suppress. They may not reach out directly. That would be too vulnerable. Instead, they start sending subtle signals, small digital breadcrumbs, viewing your stories, liking an old post, sending a random meme, not to reconnect fully, but to test the waters, to see if you'll respond, to see if you're still emotionally available. It's their indirect way of asking, are you still there? Do you still care? But here lies the paradox. If you respond too quickly, they retreat again, because the emotional chase makes them feel trapped. Yet if you remain detached, they spiral into confusion and self-doubt. It becomes a quiet tug-of-war between longing and fear, closeness and distance. Time, however, is the great revealer. Weeks or even months of silence force both of you to confront what's real. You begin to see how much of your connection was built on emotional need. The desire to fix, to prove, to earn love from someone who was never fully open. You realize that chasing love doesn't create closeness. It only deepens the distance. And as for the avoidant, they begin to feel the weight of their defenses. The quiet forces them to sit with emotions they've long avoided. Loneliness, regret, longing, feelings they've numbed for years now have space to surface. They start realizing that independence without intimacy isn't peace, it's isolation. That's when the real transformation begins. Not necessarily reconciliation, but revelation. You start healing by no longer trying to change them. You let the silence become your teacher. You begin to understand that love that constantly requires chasing isn't love, it's survival. And they begin to understand that avoiding love to feel safe only leads to emptiness. For some avoidants, this moment becomes the first crack in their armor, the beginning of emotional growth. For others, it's a missed opportunity they'll quietly regret. But for you, it's clarity, because once you stop chasing someone who fears connection, you finally give space for genuine connection. The kind that doesn't require proving or begging. The kind that flows naturally, built on mutual safety instead of emotional pursuit. So when both of you stop contacting each other, it's not just silence, it's transformation. It's the point where illusion ends and self-awareness begins. The moment where your emotional dependence turns into strength. And for the avoidant, it's the moment where their emotional armor starts to feel too heavy to carry. The truth is, silence reveals everything words once hid. And when you both stop speaking, you finally start hearing what your souls were trying to say all along. For some avoidants, silence becomes unbearable. At first, it feels like victory, proof that they've regained control. But as days turn into weeks, something begins to shift. The quiet starts to echo. Their mind drifts back to the warmth you once gave, the laughter, the small reassurances, the emotional safety they didn't realize they needed. They start replaying moments, your voice, your patience, the peace they felt in your presence, and feel a strange ache they can't name. That ache isn't just about missing you, it's recognition of what they lost through fear. Meanwhile, you begin to grow. You start understanding that silence doesn't have to mean loss. It can mean liberation. You stop checking your phone, stop rehearsing what you'd say if they came back. Instead, your focus shifts inward. You start rebuilding your peace, your confidence, your boundaries. And then something powerful happens. You realize you don't need closure from them, because silence is closure. It's their truth revealed, not in words, but in absence. You start seeing that the very space that once felt like rejection is now your protection. You stop craving their validation and start valuing your own energy. As time passes, this shift doesn't go unnoticed. The avoidant feels it, the subtle change in energy. They can sense that you've detached, and that's when curiosity begins to turn into longing. Months later, when the silence has stretched too long, the avoidant may reappear, sometimes quietly, sometimes unexpectedly. A casual, "Hey, how have you been?" text, a random comment on your post, maybe even a nostalgic message disguised as small talk. But it's never just about conversation. It's a test to see if the door is still open. Deep down, even the most dismissive avoidants crave emotional safety. They just don't know how to create it. When they sense you've moved on, not in anger but in peace, it triggers their deepest insecurity, that they pushed away someone who truly saw them. If you've healed, you'll notice the shift immediately. Their charm might still be there, but it doesn't pull you the same way. Their silence no longer feels mysterious. It feels predictable. You recognize the pattern, the pull, the retreat, the cycle, and instead of reacting, you simply understand. That understanding, that calm detachment, is your power. Not because you've won, but because you've grown. You no longer seek to fix what was broken. You see it clearly for what it was. Healing doesn't always mean reunion. Sometimes it means recognition. It's seeing the pattern without needing to repeat it. It's choosing peace over the endless chase. And here's the paradox. When you finally stop reaching out, not as a tactic, but as an act of self-respect, that's when the avoidant feels your absence most profoundly. Your silence becomes louder than any words you could have spoken, because now it's not about punishment, it's about release. And nothing unsettles an avoidant more than realizing the person who once chased them has become completely emotionally indifferent. For some, that silence becomes a mirror, a painful reflection that forces them to confront the very thing they've been running from, their own wounds. They start questioning why love feels suffocating, why closeness feels like danger, and why every relationship ends in distance. This awareness doesn't arrive overnight. It comes slowly, quietly, often in moments of stillness when they least expect it. But sometimes your absence becomes the spark that begins their healing. For others, the reaction is different. They double down on avoidance, throwing themselves into work, distractions, or new relationships. They run faster, hoping to escape the void. But that emptiness always follows, because no new connection can fill the silence left by unhealed emotion. So when you both stop contacting each other, what happens next isn't just about who reaches out first. It's about who grows through the silence. For you, this becomes a journey of self-worth. You learn that love isn't proven through chasing. It's experienced through mutual effort and emotional safety. You begin to understand that the love you were trying to give them is the same love you needed to give yourself. For them, it's a confrontation with fear, the fear of vulnerability, the fear of being truly seen, the fear that every time they run, they're not protecting themselves. They're losing something irreplaceable. Sometimes that silence leads to reconciliation, but only when both have evolved, when both have faced their patterns and chosen growth over comfort. Other times it becomes a sacred ending, a quiet, dignified closing chapter that frees you both to heal. And if you ever wonder whether they still think of you, the answer is yes. Maybe not constantly, but deeply. They think of you in moments of quiet, when the world slows down and distractions fade. They remember your calm, your presence, your patience, not because they can't move on, but because some souls leave an imprint that never fades. But the real question isn't whether they think of you. It's whether you think of you. Because when you finally turn your focus inward, when your peace becomes your priority, that's when you truly win. The silence between you no longer feels like a graveyard of lost love. It becomes the birthplace of your emotional freedom. So if you're in that quiet space right now wondering what happens next, remember this. Silence doesn't destroy real connections. It reveals them. It shows you which bonds were built on fear and which were built on truth. Sometimes the person who pulls away is the one who teaches you the most. Not through their presence, but through their absence. And in that stillness, you finally learn what love really means. Not needing to be chased, not needing to chase, just peace. When the noise fades and only silence remains, that's where truth speaks the loudest. If this message touched something inside you, subscribe to FactsWorth for more quiet truths about love, connection, and the human heart.